Hey everyone, I'm Madonna and this is David, and we're going to
Hello.
talk about discussions that are a bit challenging
hmm
when you are in the non-mainstream arena.
Okay. And the other thing we're going to do today is a bit of a demonstration because in
Micro skills.
micro skills. So in counselling, we use a lot of skills that are kind of invisible to people. Like, because my experience of counselling, when I went and saw, I've seen counsellors a couple of times, and when you go see them and you don't know anything about it, you kind of like wonder what they're doing.
Yeah.
Because all they seem to do is listening and reflect things back and sometimes challenge, but at a later stage. And so, but the thing is, some of them we can learn to do them at home
Nice.
really easily with the people we love, or sometimes with people who, maybe we can do it with the people at work or this sort of thing.
Mm. Yeah, I remember having a really challenging conversation with someone going about back about 5, 10 years ago. And I think the only reason I got through that conversation because it was very nasty towards me with this person. We were out to
Right.
lunch and there was a difference of opinion that was a real challenge.
hmm
And I just remembered in that moment where she was haranguing me about one of my belief systems,
Okay.
and maybe it was 10 years ago anyway, and it was interesting because I remember just taking a breath and thinking to myself, oh my gosh, isn't this person, she's been really damaged by this.
Was it that you had an alternative opinion to what the
Oh,
general
absolutely.
what most people are thinking?
She's very mainstream,
Okay.
very mainstream.
Well, see, artists have that problem all the time
Right.
because because I'm an artist, as well as, and when you're an artist, you kind of do this thing where if you're in the forest, you can't see the trees.
Yeah.
So you want to get outside so you can look at society and so you form a very alternative way of thinking and life just by standing outside and developing your own way of
Yeah.
thinking.
And with me, because, just thinking about why, because both of us have actually been outside the mainstream for a long, long time for different reasons. For me, I had a child when I was very young.
Right.
So that sort of put me in a position of, that not very well thought about, within town. And so by the time I started getting into natural therapies, for whatever reason, that really, I'm so glad. I'm so grateful. I had two
That was
aunts.
like in your mid-20s.
Yeah, so I think I was, so how old am I? Yeah, so I think by the time I was 25, I was a naturopath. So maybe 22, I
Right,
started
okay.
studying,
No.
so I was quite young. And, by that stage, I had two kids. And, and luckily, my hubby was really willing and able for me just to stay at home with, the kids and study, and create something. And it didn't even occur to me. One of the funny thing was, that I was maybe 2 years into doing naturopathy, and one day he said about starting a clinic, and I remember my response was, "Oh, I could never charge anyone for this."
Right.
It had not occurred to me.
Mm.
I was learning because I was loving it,
Oh,
and
isn't that interesting?
so I think my first 2 hour appointment I charged $25.
Right.
Anyway, yeah. Anyway, we all get over that eventually. Anyway, so how do you want to run this?
Well,
So, but being outside the mainstream, it's not that easy when you've got friends who have just grown up totally mainstream,
hmm.
and they just believe everything from that mainstream narrative. It makes you feel, if you don't have a good self-worth, self-esteem,
Hmm.
then it can really mess with your self-worth, self-esteem.
Okay.
Being just simply being in conversations.
So that's really interesting. So let's just look at that for a moment. So Sigmund Freud, who is kind of really attributed as being inventing modern psychology, he's
Even
a
if he thought everyone was in love with their mothers.
well, it was
Ignore
like
that.
there was well, that was actually they were researching. They didn't understand any of that. Like they're breaking new ground,
Yeah.
and when you're researching breaking new ground, you have to experiment with ideas.
All right.
What Albert Einstein said: if we knew what we were doing, we wouldn't call it research.
Right.
Right. So you have to go outside the usual way of thinking to invent things,
Yes.
and
And if doctors knew what they were doing, they wouldn't call it their practice.
right. Well,
Joking,
we're
joking, joking,
but
joking.
we're all practitioners. So we're all practicing, and we practice, and we like all practitioners. We do professional development.
Yeah,
We're always improving our practice, and
you should absolutely be.
Yeah, and but so the issue there is that the mainstream is, so he called that the superego, right?
Right,
And it's basically, we learn it in the middle stage of development at school, where we learn to conform to what the other kids are doing and conform to the rules. Do
right,
you know what I mean, at school? And then but the problem comes when we're adults is that everyone kind of bumps everybody into this way of thinking,
right.
right? And so a lot of people um, have just really, that's all they've had. They're basically the way a lot of us live is we find out what the rules of the game are, we follow them, and we make sure everybody else follows them too. Because if
Right.
somebody goes outside, um, they're
There might be
they're
chaos.
oh well the sociology term is they're deviating,
Right.
and
So,
so
because I remember reading something with the UK head of psychology or head of the health department to do with psychology back about 20 years ago, said the most dangerous person on the planet is someone with his own thoughts.
who said that?
The head of psychology in the UK back in 2000.
Well, they might have let go of their textbooks because the fact is in sociology they take deviance, right? So in society there's a norm, okay, and then they can measure how many people are deviating from the norm,
Right,
right? And so I remember the old textbook I read, and they're talking about a deviance ratio,
right,
right? In some societies where this is very strong, you see they'll have very high conviction rates for any crime,
right.
like some totalitarian countries. We won't mention them, but
Australia.
no, no, no. Yeah,
Joking,
yeah, yeah.
joking.
Okay. Well, but this is getting the principle down. Some totalitarian countries, which are sometimes communist, they'll have like a 97% conviction rate. In other
Right,
words, if you get brought to task with a crime, the likelihood of you getting convicted is almost 100%.
right,
Whereas so that's the superego, what we're talking about, taken to an extreme. Whereas in Western culture, how they measured it was there's two types of people who deviate. People who are criminals, but also people who are geniuses.
right.
So people who are going outside the norm to develop their own culture,
Yep.
which is like what criminal gangs do. And so they're called rebels. I think Robert K. Merton did this research. They're called rebels. They're completely outside altogether,
Right.
right? But when you deviate from the norms are a valid way of getting an income, say, and then a valid way of achieving social status.
Right.
But in an alternative way, you develop an alternative way to gain those things,
Yeah.
right? And so with the ratio, it means that a bigger ratio, we've got a higher crime rate, but we've got a higher percentage of individual thinking for innovation, which is what the point of genius is. You want to help the people in your culture who are thinking alternatively brilliantly, because that's what innovates for the future.
Right.
And so the closer, when that closes up, as we saw during the pandemic, that ratio got closed down just by the situation. And so you see a stunting of innovation during that period.
Yeah.
And that's pretty easy to see and so now everybody's catching up. And
Well, they talk
they're
about,
gaining their freedoms back that they were taken off them.
I wonder, how they've talked about, and you might know this, I haven't seen studies on this, I just have another hypothesis about it. But children lost IQ points during the pandemic because of the masks and because of lack of human contact and all sorts of things like that. Do you know about a loss of IQ with humans, with adults?
Yeah.
Like,
So
did we, as the people who were forced into those situations with
but people
masking?
under stress, their IQ goes down.
Right.
Like, so they found in some studies, I was listening to, there's a online counselling teacher called Tim Fletcher, look him up. He was saying that when people get really stressed and they dissociate, their IQ plummets.
Yes.
So IQ
Dissociate, say.
dissociate's a complicated thing that's hard
You're not
to.
talking multiple personalities.
No, no, people from trauma backgrounds
Okay.
often, dissociation is often a fantasy.
Okay.
They go into a fantasy and it's like a splitting. It's really hard to understand.
Okay. No, no, no.
Even after studying it for all the years, it's really hard. So dissociation is going outside yourself.
Right.
And so people with things like you mentioned, multiple borderline personality disorder, they're dissociating to a point where they're splitting into several personalities.
Yeah.
But that can be a singular thing.
Right.
And an example is somebody with a really high trauma background might just need to be by themselves and watch TV for hours every day.
Yeah.
It's
I
the
was
only way
thinking the
they can.
mobile phone, being on, X or Facebook or, just being.
I tend to think that people bring this is bad, that's bad, that's bad, that's bad, but I kind of like you can kind of average all that in stress. And if stress
Yeah.
levels go up, IQ goes down because your brain doesn't work as properly.
Yeah.
If you have
Properly.
as well, if you have like during the lockdown, if you have physical contact reduced, then oxytocin will be reduced.
Yeah, not being able to see
Dopamine.
family and friends
Yeah,
and loved
so
ones.
during that period, there was a lot of opportunities where we'd normally get positive hormones working. They couldn't work because they were removed.
And of course, the division because of all the belief systems going on through that time.
Right, and so what happens there is
well.
our opportunity for positive hormones like serotonin, which helps us sleep, energy, serotonin, dopamine, which makes us feel good, endorphins, because we couldn't exercise. And so all of the positive hormones were taken away during that period.
Yeah.
And so people, when your positive hormones go down, your negative hormones come up.
Yeah.
And people with negative hormones up are really negative and critical.
Yeah.
Right. And so people were forced into a neuroreceptor state where mostly the likelihood is that they would be negative. And you saw that people were very negative towards each other because their normal goals, dopamine, their normal resources for getting stable neurodevelopment in their brain were removed. And that was an interesting experiment. It wasn't funny.
Yeah.
And, but that's the outcome. And then everyone goes, oh, but it didn't happen like that, but it did happen like that. If you get those things taken off you, it's going to be very hard to maintain positive hormones without the necessary social ingredients.
Some people had a great time. They just had 6 months, 2 years off work and, just stayed at home and, had a ball, learned how to, what was their joke? That they were learning how to make sourdough bread.
Right. Well, a lot of people have been going back to work this year and they're not happy about it.
Yeah.
I've got a neighbour, he's got to go to work every day now and he was able to work at home 3 days a week until recently, but everyone's going back to the office.
Yeah.
Because they're paying rent.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So microskilling. So what are we going to go through?
Microskills. So microskills are a counselling methodology. It's a very holistic way of doing things. And when you see a counsellor, you wouldn't normally see it happening.
Right.
But what we're doing is there's 4 types of microskills. And the first one's attending. So when a client comes in, you become aware of, your eye contact, how their body is, what's their tone of voice like. You're becoming aware of all the sensory things around that person, how they hold themselves, whether they're afraid to talk, do you know what I mean? How comfortable they feel. And so that's all attending skills. But then when you get people telling their story, you use these things called reflection of meaning and reflection of feeling, where you reflect back the narrative and also you reflect back the feelings that they're expressing, and you reflect them back partly to see if you've got it right. And then once they go, yes, that's right, then you can validate those things. So, I'd feel like that too if I was in that situation. And, you think through it like that, how the narrative is fitting in there, because often people are coming to counselling because they're not feeling validated.
Yeah.
But this sort of style of thing you can use in everyday life. And so if you practice it well, you can learn how to just communicate better and hear, because we want to be heard.
Yeah.
And often when we're in family situations or situations at work, if you use these skills, you can kind of it's like having a little superpower up your sleeve.
Nice.
And so basically what we're doing is when the person's telling the story, you mirror you're mirroring it back. And that's,
so should we do it?
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
So have you got a topic?
Well, let's talk about
whatever you like.
Well, let's talk about that division because of being in the minority. So the last couple of years, the superego was that we follow the government, we follow all the rules. Because of my natural therapies background, I found that really, really challenging because I've done theses on some of the things.
All right, well, let's do it. So first, what do we call this? We'll call it a microskills conversation. No, what's something more personal? A listening conversation?
Okay.
So you ask permission. You say, oh, I'd like to have a chat. Can we?
Okay, I'd like to have a chat about what's been going on the last couple of years and how it's been making me feel.
Okay. And we'll have an active
Yeah.
micro skills sort of chat. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so one of the things I noticed throughout 2020 is that I started irritating my clients because I was actually I hadn't thought about my clients until this second, but because I was a bit vocal about how the immune system worked, for example.
Right.
And when I was talking about natural immunity and things like that, I was having people come back at me with real anger and hate.
So they were feeling uncomfortable, and they were. So what do you mean they were coming back with?
Because people just wanted to believe the narrative that was being pushed on
So we're talking about during the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're talking about the
even to this day, there's still some clients that I'm just very careful with what I say.
Okay. So before the pandemic, you were able to be free with what you said, and then when it happened, you had to be careful with what you were saying.
I've never had to do that with some of my clients. Some of my clients I've been seeing for 25, 30 years, I've lost in the last few years because...
Right. Okay, and how did that make you? How did that make you feel? Like,
It feels pretty traumatic, because I've always had people who, have been doing this a long, long time.
Yeah.
So, and the people who have been with me for the longest are the ones who trust me the most as a general rule. So when all of us, because we've never had this in our lifetime where there was something health-wise being pushed on the television all day, every day, that was changing the way people understood.
There's nothing like it in my life. That's
no,
sure.
So the fact that people were not being told, so right at the beginning, I was posting on Facebook and saying, hey, it's your immune system. Let's improve our vitamin C and zinc and vitamin K and D. And, and I was getting censored. I was getting shut down. I was getting hate comments by not understanding how dangerous it was. And, obviously I wanted to go kill Granny, which of course I didn't.
Right. Okay, right. And so at first, so you were just doing what you were normally doing.
Yeah.
And
which
also
is promoting natural health in our bodies, which is how health works.
Okay, and you didn't expect that.
I did not expect that at all.
Okay.
I did not expect it at all.
So the trauma, so that was a shock for a start.
And yes.
And you were surprised?
Yeah. And the division became even bigger once the mandated shots came out, because once again, I wasn't saying to anyone. Actually, I did beg a few people not to do it, but and there were lots of people that I just left the room and just cried, and I'd come back in. So because it was quite devastating. For crying.
I mean, my wife had extremely bad vaccine injury.
Yeah.
And
yeah. So I
was told it was safe and effective.
Yeah. So it's been quite a and last week alone I had 4 stories of deaths within clients within days. It was like boom, 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 boom. So there's a lot going on.
Yes. So you've had
But I was watching the trials. So it's not like I was just, crazy out there saying, oh, I'm an anti-jibbity jabber. I was watching the trials in real time as they were happening.
Yeah,
so I wasn't coming from a place of
ignorance.
No, not at all.
Or just you weren't coming from a place of bias.
No, and I was part of a science group for 2 years where I was listening to scientists for 3 hours every week. And it's almost the more I got into that, the less my clients wanted to hear because it wasn't mainstream. It was quite devastating.
So being outside that, so you felt it kind of, it put you outside the social enjoyment you were having before?
Yeah. I've got some friends who never even ask how I am these days because they know I'm going to say.
Right.
They just don't ask anymore because they don't want to hear anything going on, which is also terrible because I sit around with friends and they all ask each other how they are. They all ask each other how their family is.
So the effect of that's ongoing?
Oh, absolutely, to this day.
Okay. And how does that
In
make
fact,
you feel?
one of my best friends said recently, she made the comment, well, you hate everybody. And I thought, right, so that's what she thinks about me these days, that I hate everybody. which is really interesting because
Somebody actually said that.
Mhm.
You hate everybody.
2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Well, I suppose one thing that when you're having this type of conversation, you avoid absolutes. And so hate everybody. I mean, she could have said you hate 75% of people.
Or I hate people pushing the mandates.
And
Like if you think about who I have no love for people who push the mandates, especially now we know that it was less than a 1%, fatality rate. So it was a normal flu. We know that now.
And there was a 1 in 800 severe injury rate from the vaccine.
Yeah. And now there's numbers come out of the UK that babies who have been, or children, have something like a 20,000% increase in myocarditis and potential death within 5 years. So there's some big statistics coming out.
So basically, is it that you feel invalidated?
100%.
So invalidation, so I got that right. So invalidation is the main thing that came up against you that really made you feel.
Because I thought that once I started working for 3 hours a week with these scientists, that would give me some validity in my thoughts. But if anything, it took it away. Pandemic. No, this was the last stopped about 3 months ago because now there's a whole bunch of published studies that they've been working on for 2 years. So for 2 years, the last 2 years or so.
Right. So that feeling of being invalidated, what does that feel like? So invalidation is the main thing that we're thinking on the thinking level, that you were thinking alternative, because you weren't the only person thinking like that.
No,
because I'll just make a point here. I was studying at the time too, and because I was studying counselling, there were studies came down in March or April in 2020, and they could predict the social destruction if this went on for too long.
Yes.
And that sort of came true. And even though everybody's trying to piece it together, like I saw people who are friends yelling at each other. Often, not one time, because just to validate you.
Yeah.
I also saw that. And a lot of those things haven't been fully repaired yet. And they're over a division that was caused because of information that we're given that apparently wasn't true, because they didn't stop the spread, and they didn't work like a normal vaccine.
No.
To stop a spread and to stop someone from getting it and to stop you from getting it.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a bit pointless at all. And it was not safe as well.
It was brand new technology.
And yet, even if we express that these days,
people are still not wanting to know. And it was interesting.
So if I said that on, so I'm saying that here now.
Yeah.
And I have the same concerns that if I said that, I mean, a lot of people who, I think they call it taking one for the team.
Right.
They said they took one for the team. I've heard that repeated.
Oh, yeah. And one of my sons actually said to me that he took it so I wouldn't have to.
Right.
So at the time, he loved our premier, and she said we only needed 60% of people vaccinated in Queensland. Obviously, she increased that to 95%. Before and that never happened.
Herd immunity thing.
Yeah, but that's never been proven in vaccines ever.
Well,
so that is not a truth. It's not a truth.
Well, let's stick to this particular one, and so because of the mainstream, so let's not push over. So because the difficulty here is that in 4 years later, you're validated by the facts.
Yes, but the people.
Here's the problem here. You're validated by the facts. You're validated by the studies. Right, actually, and you're validated by the information.
But people don't want to see the facts. They don't want to see the studies, and they are still getting tested, and they're still getting updated boosters.
And how does that? And so let's say, because you said it was traumatic, right? And so just say we're looking at traumatic incidents, the things that, like in post-traumatic stress disorder, the first criteria is that it has to be around death, or threat of serious injury, or threat of sexual harm.
Right.
Now, the thing is with this is that the first two criteria is that people did die, either from one of three things. Some people did die from the disease.
Yes.
And some people may have died from the vaccination.
Yeah.
Well, no, but we don't have to say that.
But also
serious injury.
But also the medical malpractice. There was medical malpractice all over the place. Here in Australia, people were blue and being kept outside hospitals before being allowed to have any. So there was medical malpractice as well in a lot of places in the world.
Okay, so but even if we don't go to that place, even if we just go to the fact that the criteria of serious injury,
Yeah,
right, that's one of the factors, and 1 in 800 people with a serious injury,
yeah,
that's how they use
yeah,
that word, and that's one of the key words of post if you're at risk of serious harm,
yeah,
or and because the other problem with this is that with post-traumatic stress disorder, it's not only experiencing it, if you're witnessing others
yeah.
experiencing it. And so sometimes, so would you say, because actually even observing it, like if you're in a position where you're observing and you're seeing the harm, and so that's traumatic and it can be a precursor for traumatic
And
stress
I am
disorder.
regularly the first person who's looked at the timeline that people have for their ill health now
Mm-hmm.
when they've got all sorts of things going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm the one who's saying, so by the time your heart started doing this, you'd already had two or three,
Mm-hmm.
so and they've not had it said to them by anyone
Mm-hmm.
most of the time. And then that little part of their brain often will admit, oh, I was wondering if it was connected.
Right.
So I'm often that, and that's been my case for 30 years,
Mm-hmm.
So these people coming in with damaged children, it's often me who said, well, what age was it?
Mm-hmm.
What was going on? Did it happen before this or after this?
Well, in counselling, that's really important because our developmental axis, what's happening around socially really affects it. Like
Yeah,
we're like, trauma in kids is, because it's like while they're developing, so those parts of the brain they're developing,
yeah,
they don't develop as effectively.
yeah,
But the same thing can happen so with this, you've got a precursor, because you said the word traumatic, just to
yeah,
validate it,
yeah,
you've got the precursors by being a practitioner who's having real life experience of people being harmed, of people who are hurt, of people who are suffering, and they've been told that they're invalid.
yeah,
So that so then and then so we've got the big T trauma, which is those criteria, serious harm and death,
yeah,
hearing about,
yeah,
because people who are first responders, they often get post-traumatic stress disorder just by because they've got to go to like if someone suicides, who goes there? A police officer and an
yeah,
ambulance and a paramedic. And they experience, and so it's like even witnessing is such a thing.
yeah.
And then so apart from that, there's a complex trauma element to this maybe because it wasn't only one event. It was
It's
event
been four and
after
a half
event
years.
after event after
Mm,
event. And so anybody who wasn't, and so there was a safe, and so if you had stayed with the mainstream opinion, there was a safety in that,
yeah,
right? Because it's like, well, I'm doing what I'm told, I'm following the rules and this and that. But
yeah,
I was also again, I was watching all of the studies come through,
yeah,
and I noticed very early on that didn't seem to be safe.
yeah,
And then I saw many vaccine injuries around me, which were really sad.
yeah.
And so it's a funny situation, isn't it?
And the
Where,
damage from the respirators and, just the whole thing. It's
Mhm,
been really quite awful.
right. And so you were invalidated is the idea,
Yeah.
right? And so does talking about it here make you feel more validated? Like,
Uh,
because because I think that,
well, I've like I know in my heart of hearts, there's nothing else I could have done. There's
mhm,
nothing else I could have done. I've had the conversations with people I have been able to have a conversation with. But even last week, I was chatting to someone and she's had three, and her husband had had six, and he's passed. And it was really interesting her comment because what he died from was absolutely a side effect
well,
from
it
his
looks like
six.
that.
Oh
Mhm.
no, it definitely is. And
Looks like, seems like, feels like.
looks like, seems like, feels like.
Hmm.
46-year-olds drop dead all the time.
Hmm.
And
They do these days.
they do these days. And, but it was really interesting because she said, I can't look at that because then she'll think about herself.
And that's
So that was really interesting hearing her say that she doesn't even want to think that that's the reason why he died, because then she looks at herself and thinks it might trigger something in her.
right. So not only you feel invalidated, like generally, but you're dealing with these interpersonal situations with clients where they're going through it as well, and you don't even know what to say.
And they still don't want to look at the facts because the facts mean that maybe they've been damaged and they don't want to deal with it.
Okay. So in
which is really fascinating to me because, like, because I would do I've said it a million times, I spend a bomb on my health. I take some big ass supplements, excuse the French, so that I'm constantly dealing with everything because I know I deal with shedding all day, every day with clients. So I need to keep my body on top of things. And, so when I get something like plantar fasciitis, it's just annoying.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting because this is really similar to like a complex, because I look at social systems in a similar way to family systems.
Yeah.
And in family systems, like in, say, abusive, complex trauma family systems where, people are trying their best, but they still can't hold it together and it's all dysregulated. And there's these common elements that happen where you have to keep the family secret.
Right.
Right? Everyone covers for each other. Like there's a big lie in the family that we have to cover up for what's going on. Do you know what I mean? It's like it has to be. And there seems to be an element of that. And in trauma work, there's a concept called betrayal trauma.
Yeah.
When you're betrayed, but then there's another part called betrayal blindness.
Yeah.
And it's how much we have to be blind to let family reach a homeostasis.
Yeah, right.
Right, and that's going on here. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Is this fairly validating? So it's like, so what's really happening here is so like what you just discussed with that person who doesn't want to face it. That's very similar to betrayal blindness.
Right.
In other words, we have to be this blind in our family so that we can all get together as Christmas.
And then as a practitioner, you have to pretend to be blind to it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've never been so grateful.
Because you don't want to, because we want to keep in a very humble spot with our clients.
Yeah.
And not challenge too much. Because these steps.
But it gets too much occasionally. And I have absolutely crossed the line into bad practitioner land a couple of times when people have said things that are so politically charged that I just can't hold it together. So, and I can think of 3 times in the last 3 months when I have gone into very bad practitioner mode.
Okay.
Mind you, one of them I was begging a woman not to have her 7th. And she has several cancers, blah, blah, blah. So anyway.
So even it's an ongoing thing. So let's have a look. So we've got the invalidation part, and that's ongoing.
It's still ongoing.
It's still ongoing.
So people say, "Oh, I love chatting to you. You're so clever," and then they go off to the doctor, and off they go again.
Right. Well, I suppose for me as a complementary practitioner, I like both, and but I think that there's some things that naturopathy deals with the medical people.
Oh, we deal so much better with the immune system,
because it's a holistic concept of looking at the body.
It boosts the whole system from the bottom up. The whole thing, because it's all about terrain theory, of course. So terrain theory is that concept. We better close up in a minute. So terrain theory is that concept. Imagine a fish in a fishbowl. So if you've got a nice clean water environment, the terrain is good, the fish is healthy.
Okay.
You get a dirty fish in a dirty fishbowl, you vaccinate the fish. To keep it healthy in a dirty environment. So what we do as naturopaths is try to clean out the environment so that we are healthier within every cell of our body.
Yes. Which is a holistic concept.
Yeah. And even the guy, was it Pasteur, Louis Pasteur, on his deathbed, supposedly said something like, the terrain is everything, the germ is nothing.
Right, which actually makes sense, and also
because here we are microbiome,
and then like I'll give you an example of that. So, are you feeling more validated being able to talk about it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any more?
No, God, no. I don't.
That's just thinking about the terrain and experience with COVID, because we can talk about it now. A good point to make is that people with very low vitamin D levels actually died and got sicker.
They knew that at the beginning of 2020 in countries like Indonesia and Malaysia. They knew that early.
But with that, now that we know that, there were other factors like that were similar, which proved that if the terrain was good, the virus was less effective.
Yeah, absolutely. Regardless of how manipulated the virus was.
And the people who built their immune systems up actually may well have done better, because you see that the people with lower immune systems who were older, because older people, they can't get their hormone levels up as much as everyone else because
Yeah.
their body stops producing things like nitric oxide or
Can I tell you a secret about hydroxychloroquine?
right.
So over in
I
Scotland,
don't know anything about
there were
that stuff.
20,000 people old people on hydroxychloroquine for autoimmune disease.
Mhm.
Not a single one of them contracted COVID.
That's like not many people contracted COVID in Africa where they were given something for river blindness.
Ivermectin Monday, Sunday.
Something like that.
So one of
But
the
they didn't seem to have a
antivirals.
pandemic there where they normally have a pandemic
Yeah.
and we don't.
Yeah. But
So
anyway.
looking at this, we can see that you felt you were censored and invalidated.
Mm-hmm.
And actually that invalidation was more just like what you were just doing, what you normally were doing, sitting outside the mainstream and working on holistic health to bring people's immune levels up to make them more successful when a virus comes
and within
around.
my friendships, I've always been respected for and validated for being the weirdie of the group.
Right.
And now they just don't even discuss or listen.
Well, there's something that happens too, like if this was a family system, it'd be that so in a sense the alternative people got scapegoated.
Yeah, so I'm the black sheep.
But there's a type of abuse called scapegoat abuse.
Yeah.
And what happens with the scapegoat is they're always told they're telling lies.
Yeah.
They're never believed. The scapegoat isn't believed. And in this whole process, it looks to me like the people who thought about this alternatively, because I was paying attention, they were scapegoated. Even they were like, who was that neurologist from Stanford? That guy who wrote that article.
Not Bhattacharya.
Yeah, him. Yeah, like he was scapegoated.
Yeah.
Oh, so all he did,
absolutely.
he just stopped talking and just went away for a year and a half.
Yeah.
And then came back because he just thought, if he was smart, he thought this isn't going to improve, and he disappeared.
Yeah.
And then he came back online and explained it.
Yeah.
But you can see that so there's elements of betrayal trauma, and we're dealing with elements of betrayal blindness. And so because the society had to accept the level of blindness to go through with this.
Yeah.
But now that the thing's over, everybody wants to keep their eyes closed.
Because they don't want to know.
And they want to keep the scapegoats in place.
Again, I would say go look at your health.
But we're dealing with people like you and I have some health training that most people don't.
Yeah.
And they also...
and that's why they need to find people.
Yeah, no, but you and I can sit there and read studies too because we've been trained to read scientific. Yeah. Whereas most people aren't. And so it's like they're dependent on what they hear. And so working into... So, we can work more on this. This is an interesting conversation. So you went through a whole bunch of elements that you're traumatized, and you can see the form of the trauma comes from is just witnessing all these things. Yeah. Like that's already enough. Like a lot of people, because I studied domestic violence, and if you've got one kid who's been beaten all the time, the scapegoat, the others who are watching are also traumatized just from witnessing something like that. And then there's a certain element of blindness, betrayal blindness you have to put up with in a complex trauma situation. Yeah. And would you feel that they're fairly accurate the way that's coming around? Does that fit into what you're trying? So, that you were censored, you were like, and what were you telling people do to improve their immune system? Whereas what they were being told to do was go home. Hide away, wear a mask. No. Don't go home and don't even take vitamin C. Yeah. Like in my whole life, if you've got a cold, what do you do? Yeah, zinc and vitamin C and zinc and just get some sunshine and fresh air. Except people were told not to do anything to improve their immune. Isn't that strange? And I had someone last week who spent the 2 weeks during, when she had COVID in her house. Mm. She wore a mask the whole time. Mm. I'm like, people believed this stuff and did it. But overcoming an illness like that, multivitamin, vitamin C, I mean, the whole thing. It's crazy. Build your immune system. Yeah. So, it's been tough. Has it been good to talk about this topic? It has been, yeah. So. And do you feel validated emotionally, like feelings? How does it? Well, it still feels really heightened. It's still really raw. Yeah. It's because. So what's that feeling? Let's name that feeling. What's the? It's like people want you to feel guilty and ashamed for your thoughts, but I refuse to take that on. But what's that convert into a feeling? What's the feeling? What's the baseload feeling in the? Let me look at the map of consciousness. Oh. You're so confused you can't even name it easily.
Well, it makes me anxious, sort of having these people that I know I can't talk to. Fills me with despair when people have just believed everything hook, line, and sinker, because, turning them around now, 5 years later, is pretty darn hard.
Yeah, but maybe something you consider is that actually turning them around, most people just do what everyone else does. And it doesn't have anything to do with logic or rational or information.
Yeah,
It has to do with social conforming. And that if you're outside the group, but all studies say if you go outside the group, you're likely to be punished.
yeah,
And that's standard in all
yeah.
psychology theory. Because people can't tell the difference between a genius and a criminal. That's the problem.
Right.
Sociology 101.
Fauci's a genius.
Huh?
Anyway,
I thought that guy was just creepy.
yeah.
Like, I don't
Anyway,
even know, whatever he said, that guy's a creepy dude.
don't worry about him. He gets 20 million bucks a year.
What a legend. Must
Yeah,
be really
it's hard.
proud of himself.
Yeah, awesome. Well, he did what he meant to do.
Well,
Long plan.
it was a time of despair,
Anyway,
the way I
so
look at it, and luckily it's cleaning up a bit, and people are slowly going back to normal. But there's
well,
still
World Health Organization is trying to pass something today to get the pandemic bill through, and if that happens, we lose a lot of our rights for the next pandemic.
well, the thing is that we have to also become more resilient. We have to become more, how would be
Strong within ourselves
yeah,
and our belief systems.
yeah, I think
Just
so.
say no.
And something like this, using these sort of techniques, getting to the bottom of the feelings, validating the thought process that you're being invalidated for,
Yeah.
just that helps get it started because often with trauma, disclosure is really hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to say what you really feel because you're in a minority
Yeah.
and the people in the minority are crazy, easy for the majority to
Yeah,
do.
absolutely. Cool. So microskilling,
Micro
session
skilling.
number 1.
And you can look up
Yeah.
counselling micro skills and you can actually learn about them and use them in your own personal life. And they're really beautiful things.
Yeah, nice. Beautiful. Thanks, everyone.